Now, it will be pretty difficult to cover the entire categories of the solution in an hour. Okay, but then we're gonna touch base on the topics that we have for our discussion, and then if any of such topic gets interested to any of you, I shall get connected personally the next time, and then we can deep dive on the product and its technicalities. Now, as we know, all right, the industry has seen a lot of boom in the cloud recently. Okay, the last 2020, okay, this year as well, we are seeing a lot of traction in the cloud movement. What are the reasons for this traction and why these industries are actually moving onto the cloud? And that is what we're going to actually talk about today. Before we get started, okay, if someone wants to know about Azure, all right, there are a few approach that one has to streamline before they deep dive into the ocean of Azure. Okay, when it comes to the cost analysis come from the technology platform. Okay, to begin with, we have something called as total cost of ownership that gives you pretty much insight about the forecast of your expenditure onto the investment that you will be doing for your Azure resources over the cloud. And then you have the inbuilt migration resources that you can leverage to migrate your on-prem workload or probably the Hyper-V or the VDA environment workload to the cloud. And then the essentials to optimize, help you, and ensure that your cloud environment is healthy. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the resources or the solution, all right, first thing first, let us understand, let's begin with the subscription. That is the most primary aspect when it comes to the management and optimization of your resources over the cloud. Now, when I talk about subscription, it is nothing but the logical grouping of Azure services that are linked to your Azure account. Okay, resources like your virtual machine, disk, VNet, all those resources are linked to your subscription. Okay, a tenant could have a multiple subscription, and then every subscription will have to trust only one Active Directory. That also gives you the security for your billing and the boundary, and then you can define the ownership of the subscription. And thus, it gives you a pretty much good governance to have, the workload categorized as per your development environment or maybe your UAT or for your production environment. When we talk about subscription, okay, we also need to design the strategy of implementing this workloads. Okay, when we do a comparison on a native environment, right, before we deploy, implement, or present anything to our community, we do a due diligence by designing the environment. All right, so this is the beginning of the deployment, I would say, in the cloud. The first thing first, what you see is the mixed subscription strategy. Okay, from an enterprise perspective, that gives you six level deep group hierarchy. The first being your business unit, and then the geography, and then the environment subscription resource group, and the resources that you want to group with. For example, all right, if let me put it this way, all right, if I'm working with a development team and then I just want to understand what are the resources that this guy would need to complete the project, I could have a subscription created for this development team under UAT. Okay, and then uh, group them in one project for your development, and then I can tag them up, I can label them up, and then understand how much it has cost for the business to develop that project. That gives you kind of a grouping, from the native environment. If you talk about the management of the capital expenditure and the operational expenditure, it becomes pretty tedious. Over a year, the digital estate is big enough. Another strategy that you can have in place is nothing but the category of your workload itself. Okay, you can segregate your production environment development and the quality analysis. Now, the corporate IT actually does the job for you because they are the owner of the subscription. Same thing can be done by you, and actually, well, that's the ideology of defining a pretty good design when it comes to enrolling a customer or an account over the Azure portal, assign them a subscription, define the logical grouping of the resource group, and then you can have your resources link onto that resource group and apply the policy and the management. When we talk about moving our applications into Azure, okay, so Active Directory is no new to the cloud, okay. Over the cloud, this is nothing but a cloud-based identity solution, more of a robust and advanced security services are actually built in, I would say. However, that comes with the premium SKUs. Okay, when we talk about an advanced level of security like just-in-time access and privileged identity management. Now, your on-prem identity can be synced with your cloud, and the authentication can be done from the cloud itself. Okay, and that is possible with the usage of Azure AD Connect. When you get deployed on your on-prem environment, that will sync all your objects onto the on-prem from the on-prem to the cloud, and that's why the hybrid identity is in place for your governance. When we talk about the workloads, right? Again, I'm sure the infrastructure landscape is pretty big enough for to talk about in short. But then let me just put it this way, okay? If I go by the framework that has been given to the industry from good long time, then that is nothing but the OSI model, all right? That will talk about the 7-layer approach for security. That will also talk about the payload that actually moves from the one level to another level and the ladder, all right? That it goes to the application face, and that's where the user resides. So that is what we're going to talk about, protecting the resources in Azure. When we talk about protecting the resources in Azure, the first thing that actually comes to my mind is the availability of the data. Data for human beings are your files and folders. For the machine, they are just the binaries. That's 1 and 0. So when we talk about the management of data over the cloud, well, what are the solutions that we can leverage, and how the governance can be designed to ensure that the solution that we're choosing over the cloud is cost effective and how that can be managed. And that's what we're going to actually talk about. And that is nothing but the Azure backup service. Now, the backup service can be leveraged to back up your on-prem environment, like is your physical server, maybe your virtual machine, maybe your SQL, or maybe your mission critical workload. That is nothing but the SAP HANA itself. Okay, the data resides in the vault, and then you have the built-in agents like Microsoft Azure Backup Service or DBA, okay, that you can leverage to back up your data over the cloud, and then you define the redemption policy. Okay. And that's the beauty, that you don't have to use third-party integration for replicating your workload from your on-prem environment to the cloud. And the management is done pretty seamlessly. Okay. From the cost perspective, you need to know that when you propose the Azure backup to your community, all right, you need to be thinking about the protected instance. That is your uh, object itself. When I say object, let me give you an example, guys. For example, you thinking to back up your file server, all right, with the data capacity of 1 terabyte. Now, uh, off the back of my mind, I remember the price for the Azure backup for one protected instance is maybe $25 odd dollars, depending on the region that you select. And then that's the one component for your pricing, and another is the storage itself. So when you position backup to your community, ensure that you also talk about the components that are required to complete the solution. That makes more sense to the audience when adopting this solution on-prem, and then everything is transparent, so that no surprises are actually given at the end when this is a bill about the solution. When we talk about migrating to Azure, all right, there are a lot of motivation that I see that the business should actually understand before we think about adopting that solution, because we have the security landscape, the posture is pretty robust, all right. The availability of the solution is also pretty good as per defined by the Microsoft. Every resource has their own service level agreement, okay, and nothing but the price itself. Now, When we talk about pricing in Azure, Azure gives you a competent pricing. I'm not saying that they are the best player in the market. I'm sure they are. However, you also need to know the advantages that the business can actually take when it comes to completing the solution. Now, when we talk about pricing, okay, I'm sure everyone has actually gone to the pricing calculator and had a quick view of the cost itself. But then when it comes to pricing, we also need to understand the different payment modes. All right. When I talk about different payment modes, I mean, pay as you go model, that is purely consumption based model. And then you have the reserve instance services where you could actually tell Mr. Microsoft that you're going to reserve a compute, maybe 64 gig RAM virtual machine for a year, and then you gain some discount. And that is nothing but the concept of economies of scale. Okay. Also, when we talk about another goodie that I can think of that Azure has to offer is nothing but the Azure hybrid benefit. Now, the Microsoft ecosystem is pretty simple and then they always revolve around their own application itself. AHB, that's Azure hybrid benefit, is nothing but it gives you the ability to redeem your on-prem licenses for your virtual machines in Azure, provided they are procured with software assurance. Okay. Using this, you pay one license and then leverage it onto the server that is in the Azure so that you don't procure more license and save on the licensing costs as well. The workload that we can migrate to the Azure clouds are they're nothing but when we talk about the cloud, okay, we know that the Azure has to offer three different development models. Okay, like infrastructure as service, software as service, platform as service. Doing a migration of a server, okay, from your on-prem environment to your cloud environment, replicating the workload as this is nothing but the strategy of lift and shift, okay, that is the infrastructure as service model, okay. And then when we talk about platform as service, it is nothing but the strategy, that is positioned with this concept of refactor. Okay, where you think about migrating your workload not onto a server but to a managed instance, and they're nothing but the platform as service. Okay. Now, when we talk about this deployment model, right, we also need to understand the shared responsibility model concept. Now, there are two parties to your resources and your migration or to the environment itself. One is Microsoft, that's all been managed by Microsoft, and then you. Okay, in an infrastructure environment, the management of the virtual machine is the responsibility of the end user. However, the compute, the rack, the power, the storage is all managed by Microsoft. So does this with the platform as service. However, in platform as service, the end user doesn't have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. The developer of the app or the website itself has to just worry about the data and the access of the app itself. They do not have to worry about the underlying infrastructure. That's the beauty that gives a more efficiency and the productivity to the development team without worrying about what's going under the hood. Software as service is nothing but your Exchange Online hosted services given by Microsoft to the community where they actually not use your Exchange on-prem environment and then use the mailboxes that are hosted over the cloud. Like your OneDrive is another uh, platform, that I could term as software as service that gives you the leverage to store your data over the cloud and be in sync with your disk attached to your workstation. Well, uh, that's pretty much about it when we talk about this deployment model. Okay, let us see and understand how one can start this journey when it comes to selecting the right platform and the approach. Azure built-in services like migration tool itself, right? The process server, the config server, the control plane, and the data plane. I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of the technicalities, how it is done, but then let us talk about it. The first thing first, guys, you need to actually ensure that the plan that you have is pretty effective. Okay. Understand the role of the workload that is there. Align it to your goal of the business continuity strategy, along with your financial goals and the availability of the workload itself to your end user community. Okay. Now, when you do the assessment, you can do it with your inbuilt environment. I'm so sorry. I mean the inbuilt services that Azure has to offer, right? You just need to follow pretty simple steps, from the graphical user interface and do the click, 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 and then the assessment is done. Also gives you the leverage to let you know that whether your environment is now ready to move into the cloud or not. Thus, it gives you the complete control of the migration. Now, we spoke something about the subscription and the different tiers of deployment, all right, and the platform as service. Let us talk about something that the app service plan has to offer. Now, this is quite fascinating, all right, for somebody who just wants to spin the server real fast, all right, and just test out the workload. When it when I talk about doing the same in a native environment, all right, one will be worried about the server, that one will be choosing the operating system, the management, the networking, security. Oh boy, tell me for the fact over the Azure with the app service plan, you do not have to worry about it. All you need to understand is the plan that you're going to select. For somebody, all right, who is worrying about anticipating of the traffic in near future from the global region, and then he's thinking about the scalability, well, the first thing that I can start off with is the basic or the dedicated plan that gives them the maximum instance that they can attach to their workload is nothing but 3. So this tier actually gives you pretty much insight about the selection of the service plan and the features that each plan has to offer. Over the cloud with the platform as service, when we talk about the app service plan, all right, you don't have to worry about scale up and scale out. Scale up means you're adding more compute to your one virtual machine. Out means you're adding more virtual machines to your existing environment to suffice uh, the compute for the traffic that you anticipate in the near future that may go high. Okay. Now with the elasticity and the resilience, you don't have to worry. If you just need to set up the few matrices, once that matrix are defined, the parameters are given that during a normal daytime, if you reach out to certain threshold of your CPU or your processing power or your disk, maybe you can lower down the compute and save on that. That is all done by the plan itself. All right, you don't have to worry about how you're going to do it, and the load balancing of the traffic is done by the plan itself because it actually get it done behind the load balancer. Logic apps are again the part of the plan itself. Now, the logic app is nothing but what I relate to myself. If I have to understand what Azure Logic apps are, I think it from this perspective, right? On an on-prem environment, I have a file server, and I need to know that I need to generate a report at some time of the day, and I need to understand how I will be doing that. Well, I may leverage some scripting tool to run some script and run it by the day of time and generate the output. I do that by using something called a start scheduler. Okay, think of logic apps or as your task scheduler that triggers some function defined based on your code and the parameters and gives you the output for you to understand the data. Now, when we talk about the migration and the strategies and the projects and the innovation, let us touch base on the strategies. We spoke about someone thinking of moving a file server as is. It is nothing but doing a lift and shift. Okay, refactor, as I mentioned earlier, if somebody who is not, who just want to focus on their efficiency and not worry about the underlying infrastructure, platform as service is the right approach on the technology, and that is nothing but the refactor, re-architect. What I mean by re-architect here is, well, there could be some legacy app, all right, in your native on-prem environment that may not be compatible with the cloud solutions, and there comes a time that you need to re-architect or rethink about that app itself, and then make decision. For us, you can start something with new completely and rebuild the complete environment. That is nothing but the greenfield deployment over the cloud. Replace, well, the word says it all. Nothing but software as service. For example, we have the Exchange on-prem environment. You don't need to worry about of somebody who just wants to be, more focused on the business productivity, all right, and not worry about the infrastructure, the data availability of the mailboxes, modernization, and all that stuff. Let Microsoft worry about it, then offer you the software as service. So that's kind of replacing the Exchange on-prem workload with the solution of software as service. Common migration scenario, maybe the file server, yeah, Windows server, as is, boom, move it to over the cloud. SQL server, yeah, perfect, you can do that. There is a thin line between selecting the solution, guys. We know, all right, take it for me in writing. Should you need to spin a virtual machine, boom, that is your infrastructure server. Do not worry about the VM creation and want to leverage manage instance. Well, that is a platform as service. Now, I'm going to give you this from an example, all right? Now, again, I'm going to keep it secret because that's an NDA that I have that I just cannot disclose the project name. No, well, there was kind of a big confusion between a developer. Okay, I guess I'm not criticizing the skill set or any of that. All right, go for a bit for the same. But then this has happened. From the case study itself, I'm giving an example. Someone wants to develop an app. Okay, from a native environment, he was pretty much efficient by using that SQL management studio tool, all right, that he could not find in the managed instance. I'm sorry, I'm not an SQL expert and I don't want to comment on that part. So what they did is they performed the managed instance spun in the cloud and they could not complete the job. And then they had to go back to the infrastructure as solution as service and then try to achieve the business goal of developing the app. Well, here they actually invested the time on the two different solutions, but at the end of the day, the business goal was not met on timely delivery. So there, what I mean to say is, first understand the limitations that you may see while selecting a solution, and then make a perfect movement. Now, let us as I just discussed, I would say I just spoke about a case study that has just happened with the SQL itself. There you are. You see it on that application migration as Azure Infrastructure Service. Okay, for your SQL on-prem, spend the server, a database server that can actually do the role of your front end and the back end, and then let the site recovery do the replication of your workload, and then you can disconnect your on-prem and then have the data be published over the cloud using infrastructure as service. Same goes with the management method. When we talk about platform as service, the managed instance is actually managed by the Microsoft itself. Now, the database SQL, okay, for the fact you know that you may have XYZ uncompressed data, and then you just need to move it without spinning a server. Azure SQL database resource can be spun over the cloud, and then the mapping of the data can be done. So this way, the migration will happen seamlessly using the tool itself. You don't have to worry about it. Few clicks, few connects, and then you have the environment ready with all the readiness by the tool itself and the digital estate guides. So I guess with this, we would come to an end of the migration journey and the few strategies that we can leverage with the right subscription. when it comes to the availability of the business, the access, and the scalability in the compliance. Now, when we talk about the Azure migration journey and tools, as mentioned earlier, choice of tools are pretty simple and then transparent, because with the inbuilt services of that migration itself, one can assess using Azure Migrate, using data migration assistance, or maybe for someone who's worried about their SQL environment, the SQL Server Migration Assistant can be of good use. Yeah. When we talk about the migration, we also need to talk about the business continuity and the disaster recovery plan, right? That's what the BCP per the compliance comes into the picture. You can leverage Azure Site Recovery, Azure Databox, and the migration service, and then all you need to do is to optimize the environment with the built-in advisory, that Azure Advisor Health and cost management, and the network watcher for your network governance, and the Azure Blueprint that will actually talk about the governance that can help you optimize the workload and ensure that your environment is healthy, guys. Summarizing to all my migration thoughts, someone who just want to actually move the workload as is, my friend, infrastructure as service is the solution for you. For refactoring the thoughts, yeah, as a container or maybe the platform as service, re-architect if your applications, as I mentioned, if they are in a legacy state that needs a thought before you migrate it, and then you may think about rebuilding like a greenfield environment, starting it from the scratch completely. Moving towards the resources and the investment, I want to actually talk about nothing but when you, the free credits that are offered by Microsoft before you get into your Azure journey. Okay, you can always uh, leverage the dollar 200 credit the Microsoft has to offer for your practice, maybe for your development, and just to test a solution, and then your migration approach can be seamlessly defined, designed, and deployed by the strategic partner like us, or you can always approach to somebody who's expert in the field and that can actually help you. Few links like the migration and the context of migration and some articles over uh, the documentation of Microsoft library can also help you gain the same benefit. Now, the best practice example, when building a cloud business case is very effective. When I say it has to be a pretty effective approach, as I mentioned earlier, I gave you a case of somebody who actually spun the platform as service and then infrastructure as service. Imagine the business had to take it from someone who has actually designed it. So thus, we need to actually understand that we gather the inventory of your existing workload, do a quick analysis, your due diligence with all the vigilance from the pricing calculator to understand what are the components that require for your solution to be effective. Solution will certainly be effective, but then to be transparent in terms of billing, because that may give you surprise at the end of the month thinking that I was happy on my on-prem environment and I've been cheated by Microsoft. That's not the case. But then the cheat was actually the disconnect in the gap that we could not overbridge. And that's what we took and actually, give an advisory that bridging the gap at initial stage is the key and the secret sauce for your healthy environment over the cloud and the happy customer. Lastly, to forecast the cost of any of the solution or the product, you have the Azure total cost of ownership calculator that gives you the calculation of your real estate, the overheads, the maintenance, and the power that this resource may consume or the facility may consume. And the same thing can be, you know, uh, match and do the comparison can be made from your past experience and the investment that you have done. Guys, trust me for the fact business has seen a lot of movement over the cloud because it's purely a consumption-based model. Okay, uh, and it's simple, right? You're gonna use, you're gonna pay for what you're gonna use, and then you can measure the return on investment, right? Maybe if you're under utilizing the resource with the scalability, all right, you have the power to scale up, scale down in an effective way and save on your costs as well. To start off, for someone who was actually, no, let me categorize this way, okay? If we all know that we actually procure a beefy server and then we have this hypervisor, maybe the Hyper-V or the VMware, and then we spin the virtual machine to ensure that we leverage and utilize the server to the maximum capacity. Your workload for your VMware, workload for your Linux can be actually assessed and moved with a free built-in service that I mentioned earlier, and that is nothing but the Azure Migrating tool itself. Now, the strategy remains the same as I mentioned. Okay, the tool that you can leverage is nothing but the Azure Site Recovery that will give you the complete control of replicating your workload from the on-prem to the cloud. Now, we've actually learned about the subscription and more of the governance and something that is to be considered about the availability. Okay, the availability. Okay, maybe I want to put it this way. All right, the availability doesn't mean that the resource is actually up and running. All right, the availability to me and to the business makes sense is that server or is that service is actually available. I have my server powered on, but the app on the service or yeah, the app on that server is not functioning. That doesn't mean that my service or my uptime is good, guys. So to achieve that goal, okay, when it comes to the availability of resources in Azure, as I mentioned earlier, every single resource has their own availability and SLA defined to it. Let us talk about the availability set. The availability set is nothing but it protects you from the fault tolerance and from the hardware failure. Okay. Now think of this way, guys. You have two racks in your data center. Okay. You may not know where your actually server be spun or be fed, all right? But then, if you actually choose some number, okay, the maximum number from the fault. Okay, two important concepts for availability says the one has to understand is the fault domain that actually take cares of your fault tolerance, and then the update domain. Update domain is associated with the patch management. So the maximum amount of update domains one can actually use is 20, and for the fault domain is 3. Now, given that example, with the number 3, all right, as your fault domain, you can actually have your server be placed in 3 different racks. So for example, if one is down, the availability moves on to the next server. For the fact the second goes down, then you have the third virtual machine, the third rack to present your resources. Now, that's the local redundancy, I would say, all right? But then you can also leverage the geo or the zone redundant availability set, I would say, ensure. Okay, that gives you more power to ensure that your workloads are defined in the event of the entire geo going down. The so far, all right. If the number is again at the back of my head is right, we the data centers are actually at 54 regions. Okay, paired with each of the west is paired with east, the north is paired with south. That gives you the region to region availability as well in case in the event of any failure. The most important part of this discussion, again, I wouldn't say the most important, but then every topic that we cover is again vital to the business. But then something that business can actually gain from the Azure itself is nothing but their goal of achieving the business continuity and the disaster recovery. Guys, I say it is of the most important because with less amount of investment, with less amount of trouble, your downtime in the business can be eliminated with the right strategy. Now, when we talk about the downtime, okay, let me put it this way. You have your office in site A in building 1, okay? And if the site A, building 1 goes down. Boy, what happens to your business? It is down, which means lost of money. Customers are actually not happy about it, and then you have the embarrassment in the business. To eliminate all that disappointment, okay, what would the stakeholder think of? The stakeholder will think of, let's go to the site B, right? Invest some money on the real estate and then add some more overhead to the maintenance. That's not the case with Azure. With Azure Cloud, you just select the region that is closest to your business or your audience, and then leverage the site recovery service that can act as your secondary region in the event of the primary going down. And uh, this is from my experience and from my testing as well. I was able to spun the server in less than, I would say, I guess the time was clocked at 10 minutes, if I remember right, and my services was up and running. For somebody who can adjust with the RPO, that's your recovery point objective, or the amount of data loss that the business can actually offer, in the RTO, the time that it takes for the business to be up and running. When I say business, I mean the workload to be up and running. Okay. One thing pretty important to understand, okay? The migration from your hypervised environment to the cloud is available and can be done. Okay, you can fail over from a physical box to the virtual machine in Azure on the DR region, but you cannot fail back from the cloud to your physical box. It has to be over the hypervisor environment, maybe the VMware or the Hyper-V itself. That's the key. Now, someone, or again, if the business is actually, able to understand that they are okay with some amount of downtime that is nothing but your RPO, all right, and the RTO, the amount of time it takes to recover the services, then in that case, you guys can actually adopt something called as passive disaster recovery, all right? A passive disaster recovery will achieve the business goal of the compliance, that is the business continuity. Now, the environment can be built up within a day. That's the max amount of time for completion, just to see the servers are replicated, the workloads are available, the testing is also done. Guys, trust me for the fact you can actually test and do a drill to ensure that the services that you have configured are all right, and the logs are also been documented over the vault itself, that gives you and advises the best practice and how you can optimize this service itself. Key considerations when we talk about leveraging disaster recovery for your infrastructure as service workloads. As I mentioned earlier, right, you do have the choice and the ability to perform a drill with no production impact. Decide whenever you want to actually fade it over, restore your apps to your primary data center, and then the DR for the compliance and all that stuff. Now, let us also give us thought with the multi-region design. Okay, now this is actually coming from the microservice, the NTR application environment, where you have broken down your services, or I would say the app itself, and replicated the same workload onto the different virtual machine. If you see this from the article, from your left, the internet begins, and then you have the entry point. Now, a cloud is secured by the default security of Microsoft. However, from the networking perspective and the security perspective, one has to take an initiative and use resources like service endpoint, private links, Azure web application firewall, Fundor, that can do the load balancing and all that stuff. In this environment, you see this is a typical multi-region availability plan, wherein you have your connection from an on-prem getting terminated to a traffic manager that can do the load balancing for your primary and the secondary region. In the event of primary going down, you have the VNet peering done from this VNet to VNet, and then the communication is established. So that's it gives you the complete control and ensure that your business is not affected in the event of any downtime. That is again kind of an hypothetical situation. There will be, last but not the least, kind of a passive DR plan for your business, someone who can afford some amount of RPO in the RTO. Okay, you can fill it over using the traffic manager in the event of the primary side going down, and then, as I mentioned earlier, you can fail back onto your primary once the services are restored. Guys, with this, we come to an end of this discussion today where we spoke about the migration and the Azure site recovery, backup, and all that solution that the Microsoft has to offer. I hope this session was informative. You guys have my email address on my screen, and if there are any questions that someone would love to ask and get it addressed, I'll be happy to put them all in the chat box now for a quick Q&A round. Any of the topic has been fascinated to somebody who actually wants to deep dive and understand the technicalities of this or know the pricing of the solution that we just spoke, I'll be happy to connect the next time and take it from there. So I'm going to move back and forth to the Q&A session and see if there are any questions that I can. Okay, I see that there's a message that we can conclude this session, and I thank you everybody for joining in and part of this discussion. And be safe wherever you are, and we see you the next time. Thank you all for coming in, and have a wonderful day ahead. Bye for now.